Now, yesterday, Boris Johnson visited the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv for the third time as Prime Minister to mark the country's Independence Day. Of course, it was his latest visit to Ukraine since Russia's invasion began 6 months ago. And as well as announcing another £54 million military support package, he was also presented with the Order of Liberty, which is Ukraine's highest honour that can be given to foreign nationals. Well, joining me now to discuss the visit and the legacy that Boris Johnson will be leaving in Ukraine is political analyst specialising in Eastern Europe, Samantha De Bendern. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of people in the United Kingdom find it hard to get their heads around just what a cult figure Boris Johnson appears to be in Ukraine, the streets that have been named after him, the fact that the National Rail Company of Ukraine changed their logo on social media to add a mop of blonde hair the day that Boris Johnson was ousted as Prime Minister. How deep does the feeling go within Ukraine that Boris Johnson is someone who is really, truly an ally and a friend?
It goes very deep indeed. I mean, apart from all these things you've mentioned, they've created a croissant in Kiev, which is the Boris Johnson croissant with an egg yolk on top. When he had his birthday, people in Ukraine were celebrating Johnson's birthday. I don't think anyone in the UK even knew it was his birthday. So he's become a cult figure. There are Ukrainian media personalities who are even talking about the fact that Boris Johnson could theoretically maybe even be Ukrainian Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister one day. There have been other foreign politicians who've been awarded these kind of honours in Ukraine. The former president of Georgia was the governor of Odessa. So he's really seen as the saviour. And there's a lot of symbolism here. He reminds them of Churchill. But it goes further than Johnson. Whenever I meet Ukrainians and tell them that I'm British, they just go, "Oh my God, thank you so much. Thank you for helping us." They all, of course, mention Johnson, but it goes a lot further than that. They really feel there's a bond that's been created between the UK and Ukraine since the beginning of the war.
Unique to Boris Johnson as an individual, or would this have been hoisted upon whoever was the British Prime Minister? Of course, Britain has been helping Ukraine since 2014, has been training Ukrainian troops after that initial invasion by Vladimir Putin and the annexation of Crimea. Britain was the first country to send weapons within Europe to Ukraine to help them defend themselves before this full-scale invasion by the Russians. Is there something individual and special about Boris Johnson, perhaps his bombastic media personality and very recognisable image, or would this have been bestowed to any individual?
I think it's very clearly related to Johnson and his image, as you've said. The fact that Boris Johnson had visited Ukraine 3 times, the way he's spoken to Ukrainian people. This war is a very media-savvy war. The Ukrainians have conquered the media with this war, and Johnson knows how to work the media as well. He knows how to talk in public. So with Johnson and Zelensky, in a way, you've got two fantastic actors, and I'm not undermining it by saying this, the genuineness of their feelings on that, but they are both very clever at talking to crowds, and the combination of the two created a very special chemistry. A lot of Ukrainians are now wondering who is going to replace Johnson. A lot of them seem to prefer Liz Truss for some reason. So there are questions, there are fears that the UK's support will diminish, and no matter how much one can try and explain to them this is not just about Johnson. This is a very British thing. Perhaps it's the fact that we have this memory of having stood up to tyrants before in history, the memory of the Second World War. Ukrainians do very much see this as being part and parcel of Boris Johnson himself. I think his personality has definitely contributed. The things that people don't like about him in the UK are things that they love about him in Ukraine.
Fascinating that you mentioned the UK Conservative Party leadership contest and what people in Ukraine make of it. Leaning more towards Liz Truss, perhaps because she's simply been more visible as Foreign Secretary, but perhaps because the Russians seem to hate her the most. And potentially that's something that makes Ukrainian people think, well, that's probably quite a good facet to have. How closely are they paying attention to this leadership contest?
They're paying very close attention to it. Ukrainian media talks a lot about it. They compare sort of Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. They know Liz Truss, that she's a familiar person. They wonder whether she'll be another Margaret Thatcher, because Thatcher is also revered in Ukraine. They absolutely adore Margaret Thatcher. So I think, all British politicians who no longer have any kind of following in the UK should all go to Ukraine, because they seem to love them more. So they see her as another Thatcher. They like the fact that she's a woman. All that goes part and parcel with the image. They don't know who Rishi Sunak is. He's an unknown quantity for them. They are concerned that he might be more focused on the economy, and therefore perhaps less inclined to help Ukraine continue its fight and continue arming Ukraine. So British politics have become a focus point in Ukraine in a very bizarre way.
That's really, really interesting. Now, of course, you're not just an expert on Ukraine, but also the region more widely. And I keep seeing these videos pop up on social media of what Russian state media makes of the United Kingdom. It seems that the Russian state media, and particularly a debates programme that they have on their number one channel, makes special mention of Boris Johnson, makes special mention of London, wanting to bomb London, wanting to nuke the United Kingdom, more than just about any other country in the world. The Russian media seems to hate the United Kingdom more than just about any other country in the world. Is that something that they extend especially to Boris Johnson?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they do hate the United Kingdom now. There are a number of reasons for this. I think that Putin and his entourage were very surprised by the forceful way in which the UK has supported Ukraine, particularly considering the UK's recent history with Russia, when we have our capital city is called Londongrad by many people. We've opened our arms to Russian money for decades, and all of a sudden there's this switch. Boris Johnson himself was very, very close to a number of senior Russians, and so there's, I think, a lot of anger that this safe haven for their money has suddenly turned against them. But also the British have been very, very vociferous and very forceful in their support for Ukraine. And there's a lot of emotion in the way Johnson talks about Ukraine, much more so than the Americans. And so the UK is seen as the bed of all evils. And yes, there have been clips on Russian television in which they simulate bomb attacks on London. They simulate torpedoes creating a radioactive tsunami over the UK, and also talking about bombing London more so than any other country, which is, again, not something I think anyone should take too seriously. It's part of the showmanship of these programs. It's their way of expressing their displeasure. I think that we should really reassure viewers that we are not about to be nuked by the Russians any day soon.